Survival horror can be described as a subgenre of video games inspired by horror fiction that focuses on survival of the characters as the game tries to frighten players with either horror graphics or scary ambience. A couple of good examples of survival horror games could be Until Dawn, Outlast, and of course,
Resident Evil.
Resident Evil was the first game to coin the term survival horror. It was the first game to implement very strict survival elements along with puzzle solving, exploration, and of course, horror gameplay elements. The game goes completely out of its way to make sure that you are terrified, and today, I'm going to talk about why it's so scary, and how it was able to start an entire subgenre of video games. First, let's cover the story. To avoid confusion, for the story segment and for the rest of the segments of the entire video, I will be focusing on the first Resident Evil and its remake. We begin with STAR's Alpha team searching for the Bravo team, who went missing on the outskirts of Raccoon City, an imagined American city. The Alpha team consists of Jill Valentine, Chris Redfield, Captain Albert Wesker, Joseph Frost, Barry Burton, and Brad Vickers. Joseph dies at the start immediately, so don't worry about him, he doesn't matter. The main people you need to be concerned with are Chris, Jill, Captain Wesker, and Barry. The Alpha team is ambushed by zombie dogs called Cerberus and find a lone mansion called the Spencer Mansion, which was owned by the Spencer family and a group of scientists. Dr. Oswell E. Spencer and his colleagues were working on a mutagenic virus with the main goal of improving the human race. As the years went by, the scientists moved their focus on turning the virus, now called the T-virus or Tyrant virus, into a biological weapon before the virus leaked and turned everyone and everything in the mansion into some form of mutated creature. Wesker in particular is incredibly important here, as he was hired by the Umbrella Corporation as a double agent to lure STARS into the mansion to face them against the mutated creatures in the mansion to gather battle data. Chris and Jill have different stories depending on who you play, so from here on, I'm going to focus on Chris's story. Chris finds Rebecca Chambers, one of the rookie Bravo team members who worked as a medic and was at the time nursing an injured member of the Bravo team named Richard. Chris makes his way and works through the mansion, and he slowly uncovers the secrets and explanations of the mutated and disturbed creatures that now reside in the mansion. Chris discovers Jill in a holding cell deep beneath the mansion in the laboratory section, and meets back up with Rebecca to destroy the mansion using a fucking self-destruct system. That's right. The man, the myth, the legend, Dr. Oswald E. motherfucking Spencer, was such a badass. He made a self-destruct system in his place of work and home. And he powered it using a type of fuel that explodes when you love tap it. What a Chad. Anyway, Chris and Rebecca confront Wesker and discover his true purpose in the mansion, to collect data and reveal the Tyrant, the ultimate life form as he likes to call it. Apparently, according to a fictional documentary called Wesker's Report, Wesker initially worked on Tyrant and wanted to collect data initially to sell the product to Umbrella's competitor, simply known as the Organization, which Wesker ends up becoming the head of later in the series anyway. Wesker gets seemingly killed by the Tyrant at first, however he somehow escapes and ultimately fakes his death after Chris blows up the Tyrant with a rocket in the mansion with the self-destruct system. Depending on how shitty your ending is, you will only escape by yourself, Rebecca would die, Jill would remain trapped in the mansion, the Tyrant will live, and the mansion itself won't explode. This whole story is very simple, with a pretty cheesy twist and a couple of cliches, but ladies and gentlemen, despite the terrible voice acting and writing at the time, this was an amazing new apocalypse story. Anyway, that was the basic meat and potatoes of the first Resident Evil. The story does a really good job on expanding upon the existence of the mutated creatures in the mansion, yet at the same time it only makes the mansion more terrifying. The story in the remake gives more humanity to the creatures and the mansion itself, and also adds more journal entries, mechanics, locations, and stories to the scientists, which helps establish an underlying disturbing feeling and a feeling of dread. There's actually a moment in the game when you encounter a zombie hanging from a noose. At first encounter, this seems very silly, and even a little disturbing, but upon further inspection, we see that the zombie hanging from the rope was one of the scientists who had become infected with the virus, and ended his own life and the life of another colleague out of fear of what he and his friend would become. Here's what the suicide note reads. I had to do it. We ran from those things, helping each other to survive, but Robert started to show the symptoms. I had to do it. Those damn things are pure evil. There was no other way. He would have done the same thing if it were the other way around. After I put him out of his misery, I just had to leave him in the bathroom. Now I'm probably the last. How could this happen? I'll never forgive myself for being part of this project. Eventually I'll get what's coming to me, though. There's no way to escape from this nut house. It's just... everything is set. All I need is a little courage to get it done. Knowing that I'll leave many things undone is regret beyond words. But this is better than just waiting to turn into one of them. Please understand and at least let me end my life as a person. Now this, as simple and as disturbing as it is really smart. It's little moments like this, moments like Itchy Tasty, the battles with Lisa Trevor, moments in the laboratory, the exchanges with Wesker, and things of the sort that really give an extra layer to the storytelling elements, ultimate progression of the game, and psychological horror. Every word and detail make Resident Evil so much more than every other horror game. Whereas a lot of games will rely on horror tropes, such as jump scares, this game relies on a lot of psychological horror, environmental horror, game mechanics, and controls, which all contribute to the horror element of Resident Evil. Now, of course, the story isn't that perfect, but it is a story to stand the test of time, and a story which has gathered a cult following, and has inspired many other modern survival horror games such as Dead Space and Outlast. Now, I think I've talked long enough about the story, so let's talk about the gameplay. Resident Evil was the first game of its kind, and many gameplay elements that were in the game went on to become the standard of what made a good survival horror. The gameplay of a horror game is incredibly important, and if you rely on one specific gameplay element too much or not enough, it can end up ruining your game. Resident Evil has a healthy balance of exploration, puzzle solving, spooks, and action. And the reason the later Resident Evil games started getting progressively worse is because that balance became an unhealthy balance of too much action and not much else. That balance and the aspects of the gameplay which make up that balance are incredibly important. So with that said, let's look at the gameplay of Resident Evil. First of all, the original Resident Evil used tank controls. Tank controls are different from conventional control schemes, as forward will always be forward regardless of the player position. The game also takes full advantage of this by using many fixed camera angles. Each camera angle is positioned carefully to add to the atmospheric horror. Sometimes when you go through doors, the camera is positioned directly above you or directly in front of you. This heavily obstructs your view and doesn't allow you to see anything in front of you. A lot of the camera angles, such as the camera in the hallway in the east wing on the second floor, are positioned in a way where you can't see around the corner at all. Some could view this as just bad level design, but I believe this is intentional so you never know what to expect next. And it's kind of like a subtle jump scare if you think about it. Resident Evil's sound design was also very distinct from many other horror games at the time and can be seen in many other games such as Outlast. The sounds of movement and other alien noises are boosted, and many rooms and hallways in the mansion are completely silent. So if you were to hear the faint groaning of a zombie, the dragging of feet, the opening of doors, or crashing of windows,
drop it.
You'd probably shit your pants. To add to the anxiety and fear, both the remake and Resident Evil 96 use a limited save system, and the only way to save is by collecting ink ribbons and using them at a typewriter. The incentive of finding ink ribbons is satisfying and also relieving, and I believe this is a huge part of the game which the Resident Evil 2 remake should have included. Sure, you can technically put the game on hard mode to get the limited save system, but it just makes the game unnecessarily hard, and the limited save system just becomes an annoyance at that point. And besides, the game already has an autosave. The original Resident Evil doesn't have an autosave, and the limited save is always just a part of the game, and without it I feel like I lose a sense of urgency, immersion, and fear for my life. Both versions of the game also have very limited supplies such as ammo and healing properties. This is why I feel Resident Evil is the quintessential survival horror while also being the first. You feel very powerful whenever you collect a shotgun or flamethrower, however you come to find very quickly that there's only so many zombies to kill before you have no ammo left. So the game makes you feel just as helpless, even with a tactical shotgun, handgun, grenade launcher with acid and incendiary shells, an insta-kill gun, a flamethrower, and a powerful magnum. And you also have to make room for pieces of puzzles as you progress, so depending on your location and or situation, you have to choose your weapon very wisely and even decide whether or not to use it in certain situations. I remember when I first reached the spider boss battle. I didn't use the flamethrower at all and actually ended up running laps around the giant spider and cutting the webs, blocking the next location with my knife. I came to find that I would never even touch the flamethrower again after that point. But just because of several hours of a learning curve and figuring out the groove of the game, I just naturally became a very conservative player. I hated wasting ammo, and even with a shotgun in my hands, I sometimes regretted killing zombies at times. The game even takes advantage of your conservative nature by asking if you want to keep keys that will literally never be used again after their usefulness is fulfilled. Resident Evil also has a good amount of exploration and puzzle solving that you need to do, as it is obviously the main point of the game, besides surviving. I believe Resident Evil, and more so the remake, does this perfectly, as the puzzles seem fantastical, but also grounded, kind of in an Indiana Jones kind of way. And they're also introduced seamlessly into gameplay, and so they never feel forced or in abundance. A lot of the puzzles in the game are also interconnected, feeding into the immersion and plot of the game, while also making the puzzles seamless and making the game feel less linear. The keys, for example, can be collected in whatever order you want, and you can collect the other ones later if you can't figure out a tough puzzle, or if you just don't have the resources to complete a specific puzzle yet. The way these puzzles are designed are brilliant, and they were even further expanded upon in the remake. All of these gameplay elements make Resident Evil a very intricate and expansive game with mechanics, objectives, and design all working harmoniously and seamlessly to create an addictive and also horrifying experience that leaves fans wanting more, quite evidently, as we've had more Resident Evil games than I've had full psychological breakdowns trying to figure out how Capcom could make a fucking vampire so attractive. Resident Evil is an interesting game to look back on, because while games like Super Mario 64 can be easy to explain and identify, as they can usually be easily categorized and labeled, Resident Evil borrowed aspects from all over horror and video games at the time to create an entire subgenre that would later go on to inspire other games. Resident Evil's unique mixture of survival, exploration, puzzle solving, and shooting mechanics can still be seen today. The fear of the unknown can be seen in Amnesia, the sound design can be seen in Outlast, the exploration can be seen in Dead Space, and the list just goes on and on. Resident Evil truly is its own thing, and there will never, ever be another game like it. Of course, however, not every game is created equal, and Resident Evil doesn't come without its flaws. This is a retrospective, after all. So, for this final segment, let's quickly look at the game's flaws, and then wrap up the video concluding as to why this game is scary and how its influence can still be seen today. Resident Evil is a flawed game in many aspects, and while the remake tries to remedy a lot of the flaws the original had, it is still flawed. One issue I found that seemed to persist throughout the entirety of the game was pacing. And when I say pacing, I don't necessarily even mean story pacing. This game is just a very slow game, and when you clear an area of enemies, there's a lot of dead space. Get it? when you're traveling around. Again, the game tries to remedy this by including gameplay twists like Crimson Heads, and enemies coming through places that you didn't expect them to come through, such as the dogs coming through the windows or zombies coming through the doors. However, this game can still be very slow and monotonous, especially with the door cutscenes eating up a majority of the time spent in the game. And while it is great for building tension, you can still get the same result without the door cutscenes, as shown brilliantly in Resident Evil 7, 8, and the Resident Evil 2 remake. The puzzles in Resident Evil can also be very cryptic and confusing, and since this game is already very punishing and doesn't directly teach the player anything or give any information away unless through riddles or lost documents, the game kinda just enforces this bad habit within players to just keep trying to jam a cylinder into a square hole until something works. This dog puzzle especially had me confused, to the point where I had to look it up on YouTube, as the riddle provided literally just made no sense to my small pea brain. The story. I mean, what more can I say? The story obviously wasn't that great, and I am aware that's a given considering this game more so strived for gameplay rather than story, but it is a flaw, and as such is worth mentioning. Resident Evil is terrifying for many reasons. Resident Evil is terrifying because of how it isolates the player in a massive environment with enclosed spaces, surrounded by only yourself and whatever is around the next corner. It's terrifying because of the constant uncertainty that is perpetuated through the story, the cryptic puzzles, and the existence of every creature that you come into contact with. It's terrifying because of the limited supplies and the constant feeling of helplessness as your team dies around you and your supplies become smaller in quantity. The camera angles and boosted sounds both combine to create the illusion of something beyond your comprehension and out of this world coming to get you, as the fear of the unknown creeps into your mind. This game literally goes out of its way to scare you during every single second of gameplay in subtle ways that you probably didn't even notice on your first couple of playthroughs. From smaller things like the color palette of a room, or the sound of the wind, all the way to things such as windows crashing, crimson heads rising, or the groan of a zombie coming from around a corner you thought you checked already. This game truly is the master of horror, and its effectiveness and influence cannot be understated. But always remember that this is just a video game after all, and fear can't kill you. But